Crime Office 5521, Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, private room, private life, independent effort. We will move, continue the observation that we are doing. We had few hours ago the Suncoast project, the second conversation considering distortions at that spot that maybe can exist, and distortions associated by distribution of geopolitical and institutional power oriented by failures, combined by concurrent interests as illicit gains even by silence. It's a problem that will affect, for instance, my private life. If we had these institutions as some of the bottom of those institutions and security ranked as a ranking list at the Article 144 of our Constitution, and saying that they must protect the property, the citizen, and a lot of things. And when they do not act by law and the Constitution, considering only their own interests and purpose, sometimes they will commit aggressions against the basic rights, the guarantees, the family, the property of an international company. And in some cases, this is industrial crime. And then we have a systematical accusation from corruption, considering the criminal association at the institutional level as with organogram and distribution of power as geopolitical power. A piece of the transnational organized crime named Deep Web and frauds at the financial system, considering the white collar crime law Brazil. And sometimes the general and regular criminals are the exploited victims in the same way, because the owner is the public department or the chief at the public department, which goes redistributing things after do the seizures and having a new design as the cartel in the same way inside the criminal activity, which acts at the economy. But all this, in general, is wrongdoing at regular fields. And maybe the international scenario and the global system wouldn't like to have this, minor pattern observed in Brazil, despite the prevalence and domain of all circumstances by top-down corruption inside the international system, which can affect maybe the distribution of geopolitical power in USA, considering the election. And we will observe that this points to very peculiar crime as white-collar crime, tax evasion, financial evasion. All need the bank system, despite you create the cryptocurrency, and you as a big failure, now you have the stable coin attached with items that are pointing as risk against mankind and development of humanity and society. And we have piracy and aggression against the material property and a lot of things. This will help me to understand. I must take a look at the Brazilian law and constitution with a clear mind and a minimum skills as cognitive level, read and understand. This is the general pattern as regulatory from Brazil, Law 12,850, Article 2, Paragraph 5, 6, and 7. It's the public corruption on scams. The Article 3 in the same way, the Law 7,492, Article 1, is the players at the financial system. 4, fraud management of the financial system. 25, Paragraph 2. Paragraph 2, cooperation. If you act by this, offering the entire scams, you will suffer a minor consequence. 27, the silence of the prosecutor allowed us to have the action by the private team, considering the international interest, international action, international jurisdiction and procedure. Judgment against you maybe is an international judgment, not belongs to Brazil, despite the crime is is observed in Brazil as an international crime. Then, we will check the pattern as associative trail considering the segments A, B, C inside the geopolitical space Europe. And we will have segments A, B, C as sports entities, for instance. And those sports entities will have an association sometimes with the Brazilian sports entity and have the operation with frauds or scams, but we'll have a bank. And then we will ask this bank information to confirm other distortions. For instance, let's suppose that you must consider request the information at the Deutsche Bank Germany, which is part of the European financial system and a main driver at the European bank system. And then we will check using the database Sigma S model the information considering the player that had the transference, the bank that received this transfers. 2.1 the player, 2.2 the institutional receiver. The institutional receiver has a European client, which indeed 2.1 had the association as financial operation to cover the transaction as a sports player as transfers to from Brazil to the Europe by this bank here in Brazil. And we will have in the end the database Sigma, to understand patterns. And then we will ask this at the Germany bank, considering the Deutsche Bank. We had, for instance, let's suppose a sports player in Brazil, which is a scenery full of problems, and then we will check that some areas has a capital asset despite the aggression suffered and the interference at the election, and all reports that must be presented by the Ernst Young and as Big Four combined with the Big Tech. And we will consider the seizure of all illicit things. If this contract, for instance, as a sports player transference as 30 millions of euros or 50 million dollars exist. If we had something and a lot of things illegal, we have two possibilities. But things at the status quo ante annul the operation, the athlete will come back to Brazil. All involved will send to jail. And we will consider the seizure of all illicit gains from this operation. Things are indeed in the status quo, or we will do the seizure and will depurate the things from the seizure, considering the possibilities as values. And the model that we proved yesterday by the reading using the basics, the failure exists, is previous and belongs to everybody, but the value positive one, and the value positive one is the outline. All others, this kind of operation must be under review. Then we will check another thing that's very recommended to consider this pattern of macro transference with a similarity and a pattern as association with the logistics system. Reviewing maybe a contract between Brazil and Kazakhstan. And considering that sometimes criminal groups will put, for instance, the drug at the toothpaste or the soap that you use and have the distribution as something pulverized inside the stock management as supply chain at regular things at your consumer market. Of course that all this will be leaded or associated with the public corruption scam, and we are not acting considering them because since 2012 they are protecting criminals. Interval 2014 2021, considering one very specific sports entities in Brazil, we are having this clearly evidenced by this segment, and was suggested at least 3 years ago to have the Interpol on it to observe and check the corruption at the sports. Let's suppose that we did the seizure. Considering the seizure, as 33 trillions. I will have the 33 trillions as the surge. It is the money surgery. The Interpol and the law enforcement will pay each one of those companies as cluster, as Big Four, Big Data, Big Tech, and consider my payment. For instance, let's suppose my payment I can have 50-50 as a donation or something like this to the a variable in the United States, or a political party in the United States, or transfer the entire money. And they will be, for instance, the Republicans, they will transfer a piece to the Google. This situation here, I will have the status quo in the same way of the sports entity that got victimized maybe. And this sports entity will receive this money in the same way. Will have a donation or a transference to an area behind this sports entity, which is a ghetto, very close to the main, highway at the Rio de Janeiro state, which has a connection with all state highways at Brazil. To check with the groups inside the ghetto information about the cargo robbery and thievery of auto vehicles, because we can consider the public data and the public departments, always associated that scams. Then, after have all this, we will invite the big head of the Interpol, Mr. Jürgen Stock, the big head of the OECD as chair anti-corruption, Mr. Drago Coles, Mr. Stoltenberg, the big head on NATO, to be at this space, even if they consider have someone that present them, because it's about security. At this sports entity, that had this problem and indeed has the capital asset and the capacity to host this as European colony, they can do this. They have tied by blood with Europe. And then we will have all these informations present, considering the ghetto information inside this sports entity. We can host this at the sports field number 1. It's on near here. We can have this on the south zone. We can have this at the center of the city. At the center of the city, you have the view of the Guanabara Bay. At the south zone, you have the view of the Lagoa, as a big lake that you have here view. At the north side, you have the stadium. It's up to you. You are invited. After have all these, we will have something named Big Data as financial asset. Big financial asset as Big Data. And then we will qualify this situation as a feedback. We will have this as a feedback. The information will back to the beginning here, and then we will do the operation one more time, because the complementarity will show areas that indeed are maybe a mistake. And during this review, as the second operation, which is the transference of this athlete to the German, will troubleshoot the problems, and have kind of a lean management, considering this model here, which we could have yesterday, presenting the distortion as clusterization, the dispersive chart, the complementarity relation. First operation full of noise can be regular. The second one can be regular, and this complementarity indeed points to the Kia model public corruption, you are always guilty, my friend. And the charge as 33 trillion as violation. If you are a fuck face and dressing yourself as a clown and stay in the house behind or the house near to commit this kind of crime, you maybe will become a beggar. You lose everything. Have a nice Saturday.